God is like the sun. You cannot always look at it, but without it, you cannot look at anything else. The way we find ourselves is by staring into the sun.
Well, hello, everybody. Here we are, staring into the sun. I am Pastor John Gibson, one part of the brotherly duo here, and I'm a pastor in Centerville, Ohio, at a church called Living Hope Church. And here's my beautiful, esteemed brother.
Yes. Thank you for welcoming me, brother. I'm Rob Gibson. I'm a licensed psychologist in Denver, Colorado, and we're across the country from each other, but we join each other on these live streams, and so grateful that you've joined us. However, you're finding us here on the podcast, on the interwebs, on a short video clip, or somehow. Just so grateful for you're here, and while you're at it, encourage you to subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit the notification bell so you get are made aware of videos as they come out. If you're on podcast, subscribe, share, tell other people about it if you like what you're hearing. And so grateful you're here to join us. Anything else I missed in there, man?
No, I think that's it, man. We are excited to be here again, and just got our first email, didn't we, Robbie? from a listener. If you would like to email us, we would staring into the sun podcast at gmail.com. We promise within 3 months we will get back with you. We both have busy lives like everybody else, but we're going to do better about checking our email. But it was great to hear from a listener.
That's right.
Great to have some engagement. I know we've had more folks jumping on social media and checking us out on Facebook, and we hope that you find your way here to what we hope is valuable to you wherever you are in your journey and your relationships with others and your relationship with God. It's our passion to connect those two things, head and heart, together, that great collision where we believe some really cool stuff happens. So we're going to continue the conversation today. The last time we were on, now we've had vacations, and you haven't seen us for a little bit because we've been traveling around the country and doing stuff with our families, and but we're back, and we started a conversation, remind me, Rob, on relationships. We're kind of wanting to jump in on just different helpful places to offer things to help you in your relationships, and so we're going to continue that today. But what did we talk about the last time? Refresh our memories.
Man, we talked about the four dynamics in relationships that are really toxic, and then we talked about four inverse elements of those. Contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness, and criticism, and then the inverse of those, and how they apply in relationships, as well as how they connect with Christian spirituality. And so if you would like to check that one out, it's up there everywhere, YouTube, your podcast that you prefer. So you can go and check that one out. We talked about those issues specifically. And we're going to keep on in the realm of relationships. Now, as a reminder, when you hear that, you might think, especially in religious circles, when people talk about relationships, the assumption is they're talking all about intimate, romantic relationships. And just as a caveat, we aim to talk about the full gamut of relationships because not everybody is in that place in their life, or somebody might have pain around that particular area of their life. So we are talking about relationships in regard to family, friends, intimate partners, spouses, relationships with colleagues. It can vary. And so we're going to talk about skills and issues that come up in relationships that we hope will be useful to you. And in particular today, John, I want to talk about two, if we can get through them. One is assumptions, and the other is triangles.
I wonder what happens when you assume, Robbie.
I don't know. I've never heard that before.
You've never heard of that? Well, we're going to talk about what happens today, aren't we? And triangles, right?
Speaking of, pastors do not use profane language, correct?
Well, yeah, sure.
Shall we not get into that?
So assumptions and triangles. So not assumptions and squares. Assumptions and triangles. Well, help me, Robbie.
Right.
Well, I guess should we dive in the first one then? Assumptions.
Yeah,
what do you mean assumptions? How does that connect with us?
Let me lay this out. And so the general concept of this is in relationships, our bodies and brains are constantly trying to predict other people. Okay, this is where the word assumptions come in. Is we try to assume what is going to be happening next, and then behave accordingly. The way I like to think of this is, in our past experience, we develop this kind of reservoir of experiences, things that we remember. If you think about like driving a stick shift, right? When you initially drive a stick shift, it's all like you're paying attention to a lot of things. And maybe a fair amount of our listeners don't even know what a stick shift is. Maybe. So
this is a tool of the devil.
This is a vehicle. This is a car. Before that, there were computer systems that automated gear
It caused
shift.
me to run into people behind me because I rev the motor.
You would use 2 pedals and a shifter, right, while you also drove with your other hand, and a clutch and a gas and a brake, right? So when you first learn something complicated like that, you have to pay a lot of attention to what your feet are doing, what your hands are doing. But over time, that becomes automated so that you don't have to think about it. And that is a safer way to drive, right? Because if you're driving and constantly having to think about where your hands and feet are and the pressure on the pedals and all of that, you're not paying attention to the road as well. It's less safe. And so our body automates things to make things go smoother and safe so you can pay attention in other areas. Well, in relationships, our minds and bodies do that too. It takes this reservoir of relational experience that we've had in the past. And as we have new experiences, it will take this old experience and kind of like overlay it on top of the new experience and say, well, these are pretty similar, so now I know what to do. Okay, so let me give an example, like a practical relational example that might be useful to give you a sense of this. So say you're in a relationship with somebody and you notice that their facial expressions convey that they're kind of irritated. Okay, well, what will naturally happen is you'll do things that instinctively come to you when somebody else is irritated. And that varies depending on your past experience. Your instinct might be to lean in and say, oh, you seem upset. What's going on? And to ask them about it. Your instinct might be like, oh, they're upset. Maybe I should leave them alone and not talk to them. Or it might be something like, oh, they're really upset, so I should probably take care of these things for them because that will reduce their stress and make things better for them. Now, when that works, it's fine, right? But when it's off, say your brain is overlaying something on somebody else that is really not what they want, then you start behaving in ways that really bother the other person. Like when you do that, that's not what I want. Stop doing that for me. And then you might get defensive, like, well, I was just trying to show you that I care, right? And so that's what I mean. These assumptions, when they work, they function okay, but when they're off, they can cause a lot of conflict in relationships.
I just had this flash when we were kids, and I always had this assumption that you wanted to wrestle. Like, wherever you were around me, I would get this feeling, like, or I would read your facial expressions, and I would say, he wants to wrestle. He wants to have a physical altercation.
Yes. I was itching to wrestle the person
all
that
the
was
time.
60 pounds
like,
heavier than me. Yes.
Oh, this cracked me up. As you were saying, like being all serious, that's why I was smiling. I was just envisioning, and then your reaction every time I wanted to wrestle. It was very interesting. This a very diverse interaction with you. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and then
some unexpected, some quite unexpected.
Yes. To take it further, perhaps if I'm in a new experience where someone seems to want to be aggressive towards me, I might instinctively try to avoid and run away. Right? Yeah. Like I did with you. I would run away and lock myself in a room somewhere. That was my defense. And so if that happens in the wrong situation, maybe if I misread that somebody's going to be aggressive and I retreat and run away from them, they're going to be very confused by my behavior, right? This is where assumptions break down. And as I talk about that, I wonder if you think, especially working in a church, if you think, you primarily just see this in like romantic relationships, or do you see this happening just in relationships in general as you work with people?
Oh gosh, I think you said it well. It's from our pool of past experience, and I mean, I think that pertains to all of our relationships, and I see it in the church all the time. Our people's relationships with the church or relationships in community in the church. Folks jump to conclusions all the time with, how they're interacted with within the church. Even as me, just as a pastor, how I interact with people, I butt up against that all the time. Where actually just a couple weeks ago, I had a situation where someone was in need, and my assumption with what their need was different from what they actually assumed I would do for them. And we kind of had a cross wire situation where they just made assumptions about the way I felt about that person because of the way I interacted with them. And until we went and talked about it and kind of clarified, oh, wow, I didn't realize that you felt like my inattention to you meant this. For them, it was a giant deal and almost, caused them to leave until we actually met,
right.
Because they had been hurt in the past or had felt disconnected in the past or whatever and had put that on our relationship, So, yeah, I think it just happens a lot and happens in the church all the time, too, where we make assumptions. I do it as a pastor,
Yes.
Not only in my own personal
Yes.
relationships, I make assumptions about trying to read people and what they're feeling and what they're thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and we, this is kind of like a very typical thing that we find that teenagers do a lot. Like, oh, everybody hates me, or they're thinking this about me, and then we kind of cover up the reality that adults continue to do this behavior on into the rest of their lives. It's easier to just point at teenagers and say, oh, they're all emotional and don't know how to handle things. But it's like, oh no, this continues. And I think listeners can resonate with, your mind giving you information of like what other people are thinking or feeling about you. Like, oh, they must think I'm weird, or they must think I'm stupid, or, they must think that I'm an idiot. And when you're right, those are really useful because it's meant to help keep you safe from people who might do some harm to you. And when you've encountered situations where like somebody would force you to wrestle and cause you actual harm.
Right. I didn't cause him harm, by the way.
Psychological harm.
Right? Emotional harm.
Right. So, but anyway, so when that's happened, and when you're right, it does keep you safe. But like in the situation you mentioned, when it occurs in this situation where you have somebody, legitimately open and interested in helping and open to other possibilities of what might be happening, if you retreat too early, or if you cut off too early, if you fight too early, it can cause a breakdown in relationship. And what you described that happened is actually really the antidote of what we need to do, which is the way I like to think of it is we're kind of sleepwalking through these situations. We're not really awake. We're sleepwalking, relying on instinctive reactions. And what we really need to do is wake up. And what do I mean by wake up? I mean, I need to wake up to what's happening right here and right now. And the reality that I have no idea what you think and feel. I might be making some assumptions about the story of what you think and feel based off of what I think about pastors, what I think about men, what I think about a white guy. Like it could vary about what my story might tell me, or your facial expressions even. But the challenge of waking up is to say, okay, but I don't really know. And if I want to know, I need to ask and have a conversation. We all need to wake up to the moment and check in. What are you thinking and feeling? What did you mean when you said that? What am I thinking and feeling? What do I actually mean? And it's not until you get there that you can make some progress on actually connecting with each other and going somewhere together.
It kind of brings to mind this philosophical thought in that respect, Robbie, is that really the only thing that is real is here and now, right? In the present moment, in presence.
Okay.
And we live in a lot of anxiety in both places of future and past, right? We have pain attached to our past experience that you said kind of fills our well of how then we assume and respond based on trying to keep ourselves safe or be in a healthy relationship. And we have anxiety about the future. How will the person respond? How will this affect me if I don't read the situation right or this breaks down? But the only thing that's true and real, if you really think about it, is right here in this present moment. And engaging in that place is like really hard, because if you think about it, all we want to do is have anxiety about the future because we want to figure out where we're headed and how to work things out, or we are afraid of the future and we wallow in the past, and I think those things are true not just about relationship with other people, but it's also true about relationship with God. And anytime we live outside of the present, none of those things, the past is over and done. We can't change them. And the future isn't even real yet. We have no idea where we're headed or what's going to happen. But how do we draw ourselves? I talk to people a lot about this just spiritually as well. How do we draw ourselves into a present experience of relationship, not just with one another, but with God, when really everything in the world is kind of trying to invite us out of that space, where we can engage in a authentic way. And really, like you're kind of saying, the way we know what somebody's thinking is to be present, to be awake, like you said, to have our eyes and ears open, to be listening and hearing in that situation. But that's challenging too.
Right. And it's risky in the sense that there are people, or all of us are capable of being a person that would pose a serious risk to somebody else. Right. And so because we can never fully get rid of that risk, it makes doing this risky, right? It's challenging, a bit scary, right? And so I think, we need some help knowing, I think we talked about this in previous episodes. We need some help knowing what some indicators that I could take this risk might be. And I find in relationships, we often ignore a lot of the indicators for a very long period of time, right? Like this person has showed up consistently for months or for years. That must mean that they're trying, right? But our narrative or our past experience can say, oh, but they could turn on a dime just like, this other situation did. And it can cause us to not share those in the moment thoughts or experiences. And actually, there's a very rich tradition in psychotherapy around group therapy that really hits on this, where shifting you away from the idea that your perception is reality, right? Like whatever you're feeling, whatever you're perceiving is reality at that moment, and then behaving like that. And group therapy, when it's at its best, it challenges every person in the room to speak what they're experiencing in that moment and to contribute that, so that everybody else can get access to reality as the person is expressing it, as opposed to, my assumptions about what they are. And when relationships are going well, we're courageous and open to asking the person, how do you feel about what I just said? What are you thinking about what I just said? And the other person having the courage to be able to say it. I'm still working through this. I'm not sure if this is what I mean, but this is something I'm thinking. Now, of course, we filter some things, right? It doesn't mean you openly share everything you think. There's a reason we filter what we think, because it might not all be where we're at. However, I think the pathway to waking up is trying to press into the moment and say, this is what's happening for me right now. I'm feeling afraid that you're going to do this. Now, that's a risky move because it opens you up to the situation. You've talked about vulnerability before. It opens you up to potentially being hurt. But think of the risk on the other direction. If you don't say it, you don't get an opportunity for real connection.
Yeah.
You prioritize safety over connection.
I feel like there's a little element of control in this too. The reason I assume maybe a latent foundation of that assumption is that I can be in control of the things I think about you. I can see how this might keep a person, like you said, disconnected from someone or not going deeper in a relationship, and maybe even in a relationship that's trying to move towards some sort of reconciliation. If you just make assumptions without asking the person and engaging in authentic relationship about where they really are, you're not really giving them an opportunity to be anything different than what you've experienced either.
Correct.
So you're kind of, I think some of us do this assumption thing too because it's safe in respect to I get to control who people are based on what I think of them, rather than, like you said, it's a little riskier to say maybe I don't know you, and so I have to relationally expose myself and invest to the idea that I might not know who you are, or you might be different than I assume you to be, and I might have gotten it wrong. I think that's scary for us too sometimes.
Right. I resonate with that. There's like this element of I'm going to decide who you are because it's just safer if I do that, because then I can predict it. And that allows you to predict it and keep yourself safe, but you don't connect with people because of the situations when you're wrong, right? And also, I think it cuts out space for people to change and redeem themselves or grow, right? Like if I have this set narrative about who you are based off of some characteristic of you, then I take away the opportunity for you to transform yourself. I mean, this is a really common issue with difficult children, right? Difficult children will often get the message from their parents because they're difficult, right? Difficult children are terrible to experience, right? When anybody's behaving really obnoxiously, it's really unpleasant. And so the child will get a regular message of, why are you doing that? What's the matter with you? They'll get the message that you're never going to see the ways that I'm any different, because all you see is me as being the bad kid. There's no other narrative for me. So what am I going to do? And the kid can get stuck in that narrative. And this happens outside of children as well, but that's a really common example where we decide who other people are and don't give them a chance to grow. And I think, I wouldn't want that for myself. I'd want the opportunity to grow as a person. I certainly don't want to be judged by what I did when I was 12 or 10.
Yeah, right. Two other things that came to mind I'd be interested in you talking about too, Robbie. One is that and I've experienced this in my own relationships, my marriage, when I make assumptions, I like the idea that my assumptions mean I'm right about you. So it's not just I get to control who you are, but I get to be right about who you are, in terms of trying to get in front of how my wife's responding or reading her expressions or trying to assume what she's going to do in order to get out in front of a situation. It really is that there's an arrogance in that too, that I do know who you are and I'm right about who you are, and I know that kind of pokes at me a little bit, I don't, what do you think about, what does that stir up in you?
No, yeah, that one hurts, right? Like arrogance, right? Like on the surface, it might be, all my behavior is about is trying to do better for you and help you. But underneath it lurks this arrogance of I know best in this situation, and I'm going to make that choice for you about how things are going to proceed. That has a dark quality to it underneath, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it makes me squirm a little bit. And sometimes the way I interact with it, and that's like one of those subtle things too, where you don't really want to look at it in the way you respond to other people. But a lot of times, I think maybe we don't move forward in relationship because we're convinced we know who a person is, or we know even better than they do who they are, and then determine how we relate to them because of that knowledge or that idea we have in our heads about who they are,
Right. And then I might get defensive when I get feedback from somebody of why are you doing it that way? That bothers me. And I might feel defensive of how could you be bothered by me putting forth effort to try to care for you, right? That's a good thing. There's something wrong with you that you're bothered by that. And it's well, no. They're onto something, and I need to be curious why my behavior is bothering them, and ask myself, is it possible that I'm making decisions for them, or I'm being, subtly arrogant underneath. Now, it's certainly possible that the other person is behaving inappropriately or something, but I think what we're getting at here is being willing to look at your own motivations for making these assumptions about people.
Yeah. I think in general too, my second kind of thought is sometimes we do this on a general scope in terms of relationships. I was thinking too, and just in particular about our relationship with God, that a lot of times when we see others experience relationships with say the church or a pastor or, a man or a woman or a white man we make these generalizations about how certain people act. I think we also do this with God. We make certain assumptions about how God acts based on other people's experience or based on kind of a meta perspective from, looking outside in on someone's experience with someone else. And then we determine how we relate based on that kind of meta experience. Does that make sense?
Can you fill that in with an example?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. If someone comes into relationship with God and they make an assumption about how God is always, distant and harming people and never showing up, right? Because they've seen an example from other people's lives or their own experience that God never showed up, and yet they don't really ever have firsthand present experience with God. But they made these assumptions about relationship with him. I'm doing a terrible job with the examples,
you're not.
But you know what I'm saying? I think there's also an element of this where it's not just right here and now with me and you, but sometimes we don't even get to that place with people because, even like a cultural interaction with relationship, if you have an experience with, say, an ethnic group or something, and before you even, or even like, for example, you're walking down the road and there's a homeless person on the side of the road, and your kind of meta perspective is they're unsafe, or they probably did something to put themselves in that situation. They don't deserve someone to help them. I don't know, fill in the blank that
Sure.
keeps you from engaging in relationship because you have this overarching perspective or an assumption about who they are. I just think we do that a lot in society, where we're not actually willing then to enter into present relationship because of some bigger perspective that we've made an assumption about who a group of people are that defines individuals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
I'm talking
that
around
makes
it.
sense.
Yeah.
No, and when you were talking about specifically with God, it had me thinking about the ways that we take our past experience with other attachment experiences, like our parents or other figures, and then we will, that's what we have to borrow from, and then we'll overlay that on our experience of connection with God, and then use that to then interpret what's happening. Like, this bad thing is happening. It must be because God hates me, or I fail God in some way, and God is judging me. Something like that, where it might not resonate with kind of the accumulated wisdom about God's approach to His people, for example, or something like that, right? So I might overlay that on top and make assumptions, and then that would cause me to say, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah. I think that's why, kind of getting back to what you said, and I'd love to hear some practice from you about why being present in relationship is then so important, and how do we find our way to that place where we are open and listening and finding out, and like you said, asking the hard questions. Maybe give some tools. How do you bring yourself in any relationship where you kind of know, oh wow, I'm making assumptions here. How do I move myself out of that kind of cycle and into a place where I can really genuinely hear from someone who they are and what they think, and ultimately to move into healthier relationship, right? That's kind of our goal, I think, with this whole conversation, is how do we have healthy whole relationships.
So the caveat I would say before I give some practical input is, of course, these need to be nuanced to your own situation, because sometimes you might be in a situation where it's dangerous or risky, and it's rationally risky, and you may not want to do this, right? If you're with somebody who's aggressive and drunk, asking them, hey, tell me what you're feeling and thinking about me right now, is probably not the strategy. So, with the caveat of, nuance this with some help or some guidance. But I really think in a healthy or good enough relationship where there's conflict or tension or confusion, going in and saying, either asking or doing it yourself, this is what I'm thinking and feeling right now, like right this moment, not what I want to be thinking and feeling or what I think I could say that might impact you positively. It's like, what am I thinking and feeling right now? Right now, I'm feeling afraid that I did something that hurt you, and that the next thing I say is going to make it worse. That's what I'm thinking right now. Right. And that opens the person up to see that you're not gaming. You're not trying to cover something up. You're going to just show up right in the moment. So that would be one option. And the other option is to ask for it. Like, can you just tell me right now what's happening for you? Like what you're thinking and feeling, like right here, right now. I might ask that of you in that meeting. What do you like? What's happening right now? Because I feel confused, and you could say, well, here's what I'm thinking about this and this. That new information then creates some tension in my brain and body between what got overlaid on top, right? Because it shifts the pattern of like, if something happens that surprises me, like, oh, I expected pastors to be really judgmental about this, right? Like say I come into you and I might want to talk to you about, to use a simple example or a prominent one currently, I might come in and talk to you about how I'm having, like I'm going to your church and I'm also gay and I'm not sure if that's going to be okay. And my brain is overlaying every church hates people that are gay and thinks they're going to hell, right? And so I might be nervous to sit with you and say, hey, and there would be some validity based off of past experience. But if I lean in and say, I just need to know, and I've had people do this with me in therapy, like, I kind of need to know before we talk how you think and feel about this. And that is a very like vulnerable question, but it also has us both talk right here in the present moment where you can get real information about where I'm actually at. And so I think that's a good place to start when you're in a relationship that you can reasonably believe that the person's going to be honest with you. Now, when I say reasonably believe they're going to be honest with you, that might be affected by your past experiences, right? And that might say, well, if I ask myself, I don't know if I can reasonably believe anybody would be honest with me. Well, you need to check into that. But a really good step for authenticity in relationships is to say, what is happening right here, right now?
Yeah. I think it's so good. I think, I don't know how this fits into it too, but I feel like sometimes when I make assumptions, it leads me to abandon ship a little quicker than I might normally have in a like a tension situation or a conflict situation with people. Or it leads me to not talk directly to the person. And I love this invitation, like to come into the present. And it also invites us to speak to the person directly, where we're not escalating a circumstance because we're talking to someone else about how we think someone else feels. I think that even escalates the situation even further. I've experienced that a lot just as a pastor, where I can't do a lot about someone's tension or someone's questions or conflict with me in particular, because I can only speak about that. I can't do anything about it when they're talking around the periphery to everyone else other than coming to talk to me directly, and so that's an interesting thing that I think assumptions do to us too.
Yeah. And that's we may talk about this more later, but that's definitely a segue into triangles, right? I know you nice handoff there, right? So family systems theory, this actually comes, I think, from Bowenian family therapy. He was a psychoanalyst who did family therapy, talked about triangulation. But I could be wrong there. It might be a different family systems theorist, but I'm pretty sure it's him. But regardless, it's this idea that when there's tension between two people in a relationship like this, it feels more intense. But if I add a third point to the triangle and I go through somebody else to that person, I alleviate the tension I have between me and that person, right? And now this is aside from something like, venting your feelings to a close friend and trying to sort out what you think and feel so you can go back to the person, right? But triangulation would be, I'm going to pause the tension I have between me and you, and I'm going to bring in a third party to facilitate it, right? It might be like, like the classic like schoolyard issue is like, hey, I like that girl. Why don't you go tell them that I like them and see what they think, right? It's like, I can't handle the face-to-face tension. I'm going to triangulate you and have you experience the tension. Now that one's a little bit less harmful. It's pretty harmless. It doesn't necessarily teach you the skills you need to approach somebody directly, right? But this persists as we get into other relationships in adulthood. This happens all the time in families where one person will use a child or another family member to intervene to try to alleviate conflict. And then a kid might take that on as their role. Like, it's my job to alleviate how mom's feeling between mom and dad, right? Or something like that. And so this being right here in the moment right now, I agree with you. It also includes the courage to go face to face with that person and not go around, because that's really not being right there in the present. That's pushing somebody else into the present for you. And so, a key to ending triangulation is to realize you're doing it, and then to challenge yourself to say, who do I need to be talking with? Who am I feeling what about? Because if I'm feeling this about you, then why am I engaging third party, right?
We are so bad at this. I think just in general, I hear you talking like, oh my gosh, this is like everybody's bad at this, because I think just in general, we just don't like tension. We don't like conflict on any level, and whether it's in our interpersonal relationships, deep, our like marriage relationships, for example. I think a lot of times we hate tension so much that we just would rather abandon ship. We'd rather just leave the room than to deal with the tension. But the problem is that tension is a part also of healthy relationship, I believe, and when because there's no real relationship without differing of opinion or diverse experience. That's just relationship. Yep. And if you don't have those things, you really don't have real relationship anyway. And, and if you think about it, the way for me and you to get to know each other better is to encounter those diverse experiences and ideas and beliefs, and then to work through them to the other end where I can see you as you are, you see me as I am. We've worked through the tension that's created because of those differences, and we come out on the other side more deeply connected,
Yeah, we might have had to have negotiated something or come to some sort of agreement to disagree on something, whatever it might be. But we have to get through it. And when you mentioned, I think you mean leave the room metaphorically, right?
Yeah,
like
I do.
That would be stonewalling, right? I'm going to leave and never come back. So practically, you might have to leave the room for a little bit to regather yourself so you can wake up. But the idea would be is you got to go back and you got to re-engage with the person that you're encountering, as opposed to leaving, getting somebody else to intervene for you, or leaving and never coming back.
Yeah. Something else comes to mind because I'm talking about this, oddly enough, on Sunday coming up, Living Hope. We're talking about tension in relationships and marriage and a relationship with God. But I think part of it is too, and I'd love to hear you talk about this, that oftentimes we very easily go to believing that the person we have tension with or conflict with is enemy. So is someone that is like opposed to us or means to do us harm. Now, again, you're good at this and we put the caveat that sometimes that is true and you have to be careful, right? But I think there's an element to this, and I'm talking about this on Sunday, that we have to learn to, instead of assuming that other is enemy all the time, to look for the good in others and like to start there. When I have conflict with you and tension with you, it's not just immediately go, oh, you are opposed to me, you want to do me harm, relationship has to be over. What if instead we started with, no, look for the good, that you have the good in mind in me, you want to be in relationship with me, this tension is real, but if I start with the good, it invites me to engage personally with you rather than doing the other things that I do sometimes to cope with my feelings of insecurity or feeling unsafe even because of other experiences,
Yeah, there's like, well, and if you are seeing the person as an enemy, that is not compatible with being in a connected relationship, right? Seeing somebody as an enemy or feeling that they're an enemy, which in the moment might make sense and might be something you have to work through. But what will happen in your mind is your mind will then take a needle and thread a through line between every confirming experience that they're an enemy. It'll try to grab them all to confirm to you that you need to do a certain behavior to keep yourself safe. And when you behave like the person close to you is your enemy, the end result of that is ending the relationship or creating distance or aggression or something, right? It's no good for a relationship that you want to continue. And so in reality, if we talk about what's happening right here and right now, there's something that is an enemy to our connection. And it's usually something like somebody's behavior or a conflict of values or a disagreement or something. That is an enemy to connection. But we often turn to you are the enemy, and our brain will make a through line between those and past evidence, right? Whereas a good relationship will have discipline around, I need to make a through line to look for reasons why I see that you are on my side and that you love me. Brene Brown's research would call this, making generous assumptions about the person. If you want to have a connected relationship, you have to make generous assumptions. There needs to be a through line connecting experiences that say, oh yeah, this person shows up, this person cares. So actually the enemy is this tension that's outside of us. It's this conflict or it's this interference thing. And together we have to sort that out. So it's a posture difference. And sometimes even people will say, don't sit across from each other, facing each other when you're in conflict. Sit next to each other so that you're facing the enemy, which is whatever it is, the conflict or the tension or the barrier or whatever, so that you realize the other person isn't your enemy. Because if you treat them like they are, then both of you will lose.
Man, that's good. I'm writing that down. I love that, sitting next to, not across from. That's such a great practical. Like I can just see that in my mind. You're this opposing, like, my opposition, as opposed to there's a different enemy. And I believe, as a spiritual person, that ultimately the other reality in our conflict and tension is there is a different enemy. There is a force in the world that is looking to destroy you and your relationships. And what it, however you want to describe that, as other than God, is what it's trying to do is deflect you from what really can bring about healing and health in your relationships. If we're opposed to one another, we'll never find our way to trusting one another enough to work through the thing that we have conflict with, and it's so valuable. And I think kind of back to that triangle thing too, Rob, I think when we don't feel safe, or when we're convinced that someone's against us, that oftentimes is why we go to other people, right? Because I don't have conflict with this person, and if I can get this person to side with me, or and if we're not careful, the people that we often go to are the people who side with us, if that makes sense. Yeah. The people I often go to as my third party are not folks who necessarily are going to encourage me to go talk to the person to restore relationship. I think the people we kind of default towards are the ones that are maybe going to, no, you're right, this person did do this, and you're right to feel this. And while maybe those things are true, I don't know if they necessarily move us towards productive reconciliation either. And we have to be careful with the third person thing, and how we draw other people into it. But I don't think it's the same. Talk to me about this. So say I got insecurities and I want to go, and I have a tension in a relationship, right? And I'm terrible at conflict, because we all suck at conflict, right? But I want to see the good in someone. I want to find restoration, but I really don't have the skill. I don't have the tools. I don't know how to sit down. I don't have the courage maybe even to do that. Is there a situation where it's okay to have someone come along with you to that person? Like, say, for example, a pastor or a counselor? Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, briefly as we get close to finishing, but I would say absolutely. But you make an important point. You would want it to be somebody who's on the side of the relationship, right? And when you go see a couples therapist, that's the way we see it, is my patient is the relationship. I'm not on his side, her side, their side, whoever it is. I am on the side of the relationship. And so you would want to seek out somebody who is on the side of the relationship. And so, yeah, you're right. If I'm just bringing this person in to gang up on somebody, that's not going to work. But if I don't know what I'm doing, or I need some help, or I can't see, getting somebody who's on the side of the relationship to help me see it differently would be, I would definitely recommend that. Yeah. So, man,
good stuff. I wish we had more time to talk. Yes. It was fantastic. I hope it was helpful to you today, listener, for sure.
Yeah, we'll keep at it. We're going to continue sharing this information, like relational skills, and digging into spiritual foundations of relationships throughout the summer, and you'll continue to hear from us on that. If you're interested in asking us questions or providing input for us to engage with, yes, email us, respond to posts that we put on social media. I'm happy to check that and include it in what we talk about. But thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you with us. John, it's great to talk with you. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks as we continue staring into the sun, brother.
Looking forward to it. Grace and peace, everyone.
God is like the sun. You cannot always look at it, but without it, you cannot look at anything else. The way we find ourselves is by staring into the sun.